Interesting times, a UK decision to Brexit, a new president in the USA, and a world in which we seem to be surrounded by alternative facts and fake news. That's a problem that's plagued the medical travel business, to be honest, for many years. And if you know IMTJ, you know that we don't deal in alternative facts or fake news. What we try to give you is an honest, considered opinion of what's going on in this business. That's what we'll be doing this April in Opatija in Croatia, focusing on the real world of medical travel and what's really going on in this business. So let me give you some insight into 5 key areas that we're going to be covering in Croatia this April. So one of the most common questions I get asked is, how big is the medical tourism market? My answer to that is 2 things. Firstly, not as big as most people think, and secondly, whatever you do, don't believe what you read on the internet, what you read in emails and so on. Let me give you a couple of examples. Last week I got an email, and it was from a sales guy promoting an MTA conference in India. And the headline of this email read, 8 billion market growth in India. It didn't say what that was. Is that dollars, rupees, people, over what period of time? It's the kind of marketing, advertising puffery that's used purely to sell you stuff. That's why people claim these numbers. This week I got an email about a medical tourism event in China. This one told me the medical tourism market worldwide is expected to grow to 678.5 billion in 2017, and the Chinese spend more than $10 billion travelling abroad for healthcare. It was just another number, another big number, and it was designed to sell you stuff. This kind of inflated claim is just common all the time in this marketplace. So one of the things we're going to do at the IMTJ Summit in one particular session is we're going to dedicate that session to looking at the measurement of medical tourism. And what we're going to do is bring together 3 countries and some research that's really focused on how you count medical tourists. We'll have a representation from USKIP, the US body that's looking at how you count US inbound and outbound medical tourism. We'll have representatives from the Malaysia Healthcare Travel Council, who've probably done one of the best jobs at trying to measure medical tourism, and a representative from the UK research project headed at the University of York, where they've done probably the best piece of research on how you actually measure medical tourism. So make sure you turn up for that session in Croatia this April at the IMTJ Medical Travel Summit. So, is the medical tourism market growing? Answer, yes and no. And what you need to understand about this market is a very complex market that's made up of lots of market niches. And in some of those market niches, you'll see growth, and in some of those market niches, you'll see decline. What you must not do is believe the myth, the kind of claims of exponential growth in the medical tourism market. This is not happening, but there are some great opportunities there. You need to pick and choose where you're going to go for new business. I want to give you 2 examples of stuff that's going on in the medical tourism market at the moment. Let's take the Gulf market, which is traditionally one of the high-earning source markets for countries like the UK, Germany, USA, and which is now being targeted by what you would describe as developing medical tourism destinations. Now, the problem that Gulf has is the oil price. So countries such as Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, that have always earned vast sums of money from oil are now under pressure. Their governments are under pressure to reduce costs. And so what they're doing is cutting back on healthcare expenditure. And a couple of recent examples. I think in Kuwait, it used to run a thing called the Supreme Committee for Overseas Treatment. They're now restructuring that, and the value of the Kuwaiti government spend on overseas treatment has dropped by 50% over the last 12 months based on the figures published by the government. In Bahrain, we've got something similar going on. The health minister clearly stated that he's intending to reduce the number of citizens travelling abroad paid for by the government. So this isn't great news. So that's one market where you can't say there's exponential growth. If anything, the value and the volume is in decline. So let's take another one which presents a much more positive picture, and that's fertility travel. We have a lot of examples. I have some stats here from our fertility treatment abroad site where we're seeing an increase of something like 25–30% in patients interested in fertility travel. So why is that? Well, patients pay for themselves, they're not being funded by governments, and where governments and public health systems are cutting back on expenditure and spending less on what are kind of areas of treatment that are optional, such as fertility, then that's encouraging more patients to travel. And that's why at the Medical Travel Summit in Croatia we've dedicated one session specifically to fertility travel to highlight some of the opportunities and showcase some of the best examples of IVF clinics around Europe that are really kind of benefiting from that market niche. What's the most common mistake that new entrants to the medical tourism market make? Well, how long have we got? I'm told we've got to do this in 2 or 3 minutes. I'm going to pick out 3 common errors. I've been in this business for quite a few years, treatment abroad, we've been running for 13 years, IMTJ 8 years plus. And we've seen it all. And what stands out for me in the market is a combination of the good, the bad and the very ugly. And a massive amount of churn of entrants who come into this market, believe the hype, believe the exaggeration of the kind of value of the market, and then find 18 months later it just isn't there and they leave. So what are the kind of mistakes they make? Well, the first one is about believing that hype and thinking the market or what they're after is much bigger than they really think. They simply have entered a medical tourism gold rush and they just haven't located the gold. The second mistake is looking for medical tourism gold in the wrong place. There's a quote that I've used a few times when I've spoken at conferences. It's a Michael Porter quote and it says, "The essence of strategy is choosing what not to do." And what happens in medical tourism is people try to do too much stuff. They want to be all things to all patients in all countries, and they don't have a kind of very clear approach to where they want to go and what they want to achieve in specific market niches. So that's a recipe for failure. The third mistake, I think, is putting promotion before product, so that a new entrant will spend its money on getting its message out there. It's usually a message that goes something like low cost, high quality. And you have to ask yourself, the question is, well, can anyone actually deliver low cost, high quality? And if you're offering cheap healthcare, what does that actually communicate to a patient? If you're new to the market, or perhaps you're an old hand, I recommend you come to some of our keynote sessions at the Medical Travel Summit in Croatia. We've picked some great examples, some people with excellent experience, real knowledge. They've made mistakes and they may admit to that, but you will learn from what they've learned in the medical travel market. So if you're a healthcare provider in Europe or perhaps further afield, should you target the UK to try and attract medical tourists? Well, the UK is no different to any other developing country. It's got ageing population, rising healthcare costs and pressure to reduce the government's expenditure on healthcare. So it looks, obvious, isn't it? It must be a great place to go to get medical tourists. Now the reality is, if you look at what's happened in UK medical tourism, and I've got a graph here, this is data that we collect from the International Passenger Survey in the UK that counts people going in and out of the country and the reason for travel. And what we collect is the data on patients who said, yes, I went abroad for healthcare. And the reality is, in the UK, that the number of medical tourists, according to this data, and you have to be careful with this data, but it's good on trends, peaked around 2006, 7, 10 years ago. And that since that point, it's been either static or in decline. So that's not great news. But what's interesting, in the last year, 18 months, what we have seen is a massive recovery. So in this data, and again we have to treat it with some care, we see the highest ever figure recorded, 100,000 tracked on the International Passenger Survey of outbound medical tourists. So what's driving this, and what's suddenly caused this kick up in outbound medical tourism from the UK? I think two things. One is, we read in our UK papers every day about the problems of the NHS and the lack of funding, and it is pushing more people to think about self-funding treatment. And the reality is, in the UK, private healthcare is expensive. So, if you have a patient looking for, let's say, a hip replacement, then they're going to end up paying £8,000, £9,000, £10,000 to have that done in a UK hospital. And more are thinking about, could I get this option abroad? Historically, medical tourism has got a really bad press in the UK. If you read our national newspapers, they basically tell a story of medical tourism gone wrong. It's the same on our TV channels. The stories of botched cosmetic surgery in countries in Europe are fairly common. And what we have to do as an industry, and what providers have to do who want to target to the UK, is get a much stronger message across about safety and quality. It's not about selling, this is the cheap place to go to have this done. That's not a great message. We're going to dedicate a session at the IMTJ Medical Travel Summit in Croatia specifically to the UK market, and I'm going to be talking for that and running a workshop. If you're interested in targeting the UK, then I'll be telling you everything I know about the UK market and how I think you can really generate some patients. So come to that session in Croatia. So, if I'm a healthcare provider, an agency, a facilitator, hospital or clinic, should I get certified for medical travel? It's a big issue. And it's why we're going to have some serious debate, but some fun at the IMTJ Medical Travel Summit in Croatia. And I'll be chairing a debate. And this is going to be an Oxford Union style debate in a very British format, but it's designed to share some of the views and opinions about this big issue. The topic of the debate is, does accreditation and certification make a difference in medical travel? If I'm a patient looking to go for treatment abroad, how do I know that this is a safe hospital to go to? How do I know that I can trust the agent or the facilitator and that individual or that company knows what they're talking about? Around the world, many people have jumped on the accreditation and certification gravy train, really. If you take JCI, Joint Commission International, they've now accredited something like 900 plus, close to 1,000 hospitals around the world. That's an expensive accreditation program. But we have to ask the question, does that make the hospital safer? Does that guarantee that there's a better service for patients? In the same way, there's been a rush to certify, certification, certificates for people, clinics, hospitals and so on in medical travel. Are these worth it? Or are they just there because someone decided they can make money or sell stuff through selling certification? Now we know there's a US organisation that will sell you, that will turn you into a medical tourism professional and give you a certificate for that through attending a workshop and doing some online assessment. And you pay them $1,000 or thereabouts for that. Now the question you have to ask, does that qualify you to handle the complexities of managing international patients? Does it guarantee to the patient that you're going to give them appropriate advice? And does it mean that by spending that $1,000 you're going to get more patients because you're certified? So it's a big question. We're going to have a great debate. We've got some excellent contributors on both sides of the debate. The speakers may not necessarily be wholeheartedly behind their part of the motion, but they're going to present the arguments to you, and our audience is going to take a vote. So come to that debate. Does accreditation and certification make a difference in medical travel?